Welcome back everybody. Today we're going to take a look at implementing some of the base functionality that we need for versioning. We're going to start with tricks, and if you're confused about what versioning I'm talking about, is basically when we create a piece of data for a trick, for example, we're going to have version 1. And then if somebody wants to edit it or update it for some whatever reason, we create a second version, okay? So we essentially have facts attached to time. So trick was basically version 1 explains what the trick was like at a certain date. Trick version 2 shows what the trick is now, all right? If version 2 is indeed the currently active version. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can approach and implement this, right? So for this, I'm going to go into models. I'm going to go into my base model, and first of all, I'm going to split it. There is some stuff on here that I want to split it, and hopefully over this one and the next couple of episodes, you're going to see why this makes sense. So first of all, let's go ahead and create a directory. We will call it abstractions. And in this folder, what we will do is we'll just bunch up all of our abstract classes that sort of govern the base structure of our entities, okay? Let's take our base model, and what we're going to do is we're going to create an abstract class that we're going to name versioned model. So this model can be versioned. So we'll say prop int, say version, and prop bool, we'll say active. Is this the current active version? Or rather, let's do date time, and we'll just call it timestamp. Okay, so as soon as a versioned model is going to get activated, that's when we timestamp it to basically say this is since when or whenever this is basically valid, right? And active represents that state of validity. Next thing, what I want to do is for our entities that have the ID of the slug, or where we're using the slug as the ID, I want to actually make it a little bit more declarative rather than rely on this generic entity. So I actually want to get rid of this generic entity because it unifies some concepts that I think won't really work for us. So first thing that I want to do is I want to just go ahead, get rid of this T key, and I want to rename the base model to temporal model. Temporal is basically just, it has a connotation with time, so it has relation to time, which means that, for me, it basically means that we're never going to remove it. It just sort of exists in there. And for our version model, I'm going to go ahead and say that it inherits from temporal model as well. Next thing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another class, public abstract class, slug model, yeah, and this will inherit from version model. And for this one, we're just gonna have a prop string slug, okay? And this will just allow us to do some neat code tricks, or I don't know, just basically structuring our data or fitting the models in the correct buckets when we work with them. So let's go ahead and go through our models and basically fix them. First of all, I'm going to, let's say, move from files. So all of these are going to get moved into their separate files. I'm going to select them, Control X to cut them, and I'm going to move them into abstractions. The abstractions, then I'm going to, we can fix solution in, basically fix namespaces in solutions in the solution. I can barely talk. But yeah, anyway, let's go into the moderation item. This is a temporal model, and now what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to add the ID here manually, right? So wherever we had the integer ID, I'm just going to put it there manually. For the review as well, I'm just going to put it here manually. Category is going to be a slug model, and this will have its own ID, which we're going to take a look at what we're going to do with it now. Comment is going to have its own ID. Difficulty is a slug model. Submission will have the ID. Trick is another slug model. Next thing is trick category and trick relationships. We will need to do something along the side of that basically relates to versions, but not just yet. So another thing, let's go into user. The user itself will have a string ID, right? So we can still use the string ID that we're gonna take from our subclaim. And for video, we're gonna have int ID here as well. So once we got this, one thing that we may notice is, let's see, I guess a couple of errors. Okay, so let's do this first. In our updb context, we will first specify the keys that we need, and then we'll fix the build errors. Because now, essentially, if we have a trick with a name test, for example, if we have version 1 and version 2 in our database, the slug will essentially be the same for both of them. So we can no longer have the slug just as the primary key. We can still have it as part of a key, and we can still have it indexed. That means it's going to be fast to find. But what we are going to do is we're going to combine the version and the slug. So every increment of the version will mean it's a new identifier for our model. So model builder entity, and we'll take the entities that we essentially specified as being slugged entities. So difficulty, category, and trick. I don't think there were any others. And for all of them, they're all gonna have keys of new x.slug and x.version. Okay, this is gonna cause its own share of errors, so we will have to fix these in a second. First of all, we're gonna fix the build errors. So I think I will go through these one by one. There's basically a keybind that I can use that allows me to jump to the next error. I won't use it. I'm just gonna go through this one by one wherever the errors are highlighted. So first, in the category controller, here we can see the comparison to the ID. We will just replace it with slug. And I feel like most of this is just going to be relating to this slug keyword, right? So fixing these IDs by replacing it with slug. Difficulty, I guess it's going to be the same thing, just slug here and slug here. Tricks controller, just slug, slug, and slug. And there is another one in here, I can't see it. Oh, there it is. And slug here as well. Cool. View model, let's take a look at view models. Trick view model, we don't have the ID, we're replacing it with slug. So in the future, when the application is released, you cannot do this kind of change, right? So what you will have to do is you will need to do something like ID equals slug, okay? Because at the moment, what we will have to do in this episode is go and change everything in the UI, right? But once you're in production, it's a big no-no, okay? So then let's go into our program.cs. We'll change all of these. That looks okay. And we'll also set the version on these. So version 1, okay. We'll grab this and we're just gonna paste this everywhere where it's versioned. So the difficulties, the categories, and the trick itself. Another thing that we will need to do here is actually set this to being active. So these are currently the active versions. So let's go ahead and put these here. Yeah, let's put these after the versions as well. Okay. So these are all the current active ones. We won't touch the active ones on the difficulties and categories. We're just gonna isolate to working with tricks for now. So all the next work will sort of relate to just being in the tricks controller, and every time we create or update a trick, it's gonna go to the moderation, and we're just gonna like try to close a loop on there. And then to that same working process of essentially just, because moderation item is abstract, we just want to sort of flesh out the process, and then because of the type and the target, the difficulty and the category will be able to just kind of be thrown into there as well. We'll see how that works as well. So let's close all of this. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to open up the console, and we should have an error here that essentially the relationship of trick relationships progressions to prerequisites with foreign key properties progression ID string cannot target the primary key slug version in. So because our primary key is no longer just the ID. We can no longer just have in our trick relationship just the ID as well. We need to include the version. So this is what we're going to do. Prerequisite version, and we're going to put int here. We're going to copy this once and replace the prerequisite with progression, right? So prerequisite version, progression version as well, prerequisite and progression version, right? There we go. Let's go into UpDB context and let's make sure that we are saying that specifically this is going to be the ID, because again, this relationship could get a little bit weird. So we will need to add prerequisite version and progression version. Okay, and there it is. So that's going to be the new composed key. Next thing will be this part here. We will need to say that the foreign key is actually going to be the same object. So progression ID and progression version. Let's close off the object here. Here we will need to convert this to an object as well. Prerequisite version, right? So I'm basically, because I've extended the key with the version, I'm doing the same things here. And for the trick category, I am going to do the same thing as well. So let's go ahead and save this. Let's go to the console and make sure that the error has changed. So next thing is unable to track an entity of type trick category because primary key property trick ID is null, right? So at the moment, it can't understand how to map, and that's basically how to map the current key that we have here to the key that trick category has at the moment, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to put trick version on here as well. And once we got the trick version, we're going to go into the UpDB context. And for the trick category, after trick ID, we are going to include trick version as well. By the way, it's not that important which order these things are in, okay? And because our category has a version as well, we will need to specify that relationship as well. So let's go back into trick category. We're going to copy trick version, and we're going to put here category version. Okay, so the relationship becomes, let's put the category version over here, like so. Okay, so this is going to be the key for trick category now. What we want to do now is, well, first of all, we should still be seeing the same error where the basically the primary key is going to be null. That's because now that we have all these multiple keys, it can't just take the single property and map it to this composite key that we've created. What we want to do is we kind of want to hold its hand, kind of how we do with this many-to-many relationship, and we want to help it, right? So let's go into model builder, entity, trick category. I think one will be enough in terms of specifying just kind of maybe one direction. So has many. What do we have many of? Categories with one. We'll say, and actually not trick category, sorry, trick. So in here we will be saying trick categories, and in trick categories with one trick and has foreign key. We will need to specify that foreign key that we have, which will be trick ID. And if you notice, the type that I'm getting here is trick category. I don't know if you can see it. So we're basically specifying what is the foreign key of the trick in trick category, which is going to be trick ID and trick version. Okay. And we want to do the same for the category as well. So entity, category, has many tricks with one category, and category ID and category version is the key, is the foreign key, right? So saving that, let's go ahead, drop down to the bottom. Let's see what we have. Look how our application starts. So what the god said, if it compiles, good. If it boots, it's perfect, right? So at the moment, our application is perfect. Right. Let's go ahead and close all of this. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into our tricks controller. I'll just collapse everything so we're only working with the tricks controller. And what we're going to do is when we create the trick or when we update the trick, we're going to create a moderation item. So our trick should not display in the platform straight away. Our trick should first go through the moderation process, okay? So let's start with the create option. And this is going to be quite simple. So first of all, what we'll do is we'll just say context, and we will also add a new moderation item. And on here, on the moderation item, what we will have to actually specify as well is a version ID on here, because, or not the version, right? Because we have the target ID, but now we have multiple versions of the same target. So we need to actually say what version it is as well. So let's copy this and say version here. This will harm our UI a little bit in terms of, if you remember how we do it in the URL for the moderations, we will need to change that as well. So, but for now, we'll keep this as is, and that will be future work. So we need to set the version target on here. So once we do actually get the moderation item in the end, we can find this version that we want to roll over to. So moderation item target equals trick ID. Nope, we're actually going to have a slug here. Target version target. What do we have? I'll just grab the version, right? And a version target, I think I didn't set it from string, so we want to amend it to be an integer. Coming back here, what I want to do on the trick, when we first create it, I actually want to set the version to 1. So this is the first version. And I mean, because it's not active, it shouldn't be edited first anyway. So I think another thing that we want to set is the type. And the type, we have moderation types. Moderation types dot trick. Okay. And I think there we have it. So for creating the trick, I think this is it. Now we just want to add this, or we copy this and put this here as well. We should be reusing the trick form here, and let's call it trick form as well. And we'll slowly go through, I mean, whatever logic we need to have here. So what we're gonna have is a trick. So we're gonna have we're gonna need to extract some information, ctx tricks. Let's say first or default trick form ID, and we will need to compare it because comparing slugs. There we go. So now instead of this, we are going to basically saying if it's null, let's return an iAction result, and we'll just actually return no content. To get rid of this error on the bottom, let's go ahead and say OK here. So we're gonna wrap it. And what I will actually do is let's go ahead and instantiate a new trick, right? Because again, when we are updating, we're not really updating the currently existing trick. We are going to create a new one, right? So the new trick is going to be a new trick as it stands. The ID, and because the ID is the slug, and the slug shouldn't really change. And because the slug depends on the name, it shouldn't change either, right? So we are going to be grabbing these from the trick itself, and we're not gonna allow to edit the name. We can provide aliases, but for now, it's not important to the core of what we're building. The description can come from the trick form. So let's say description here. Let's see, what else do we have on here? I keep forgetting that there's like a nice little menu that pops up here that helps me type something, but anyway. Difficulty, trick form, difficulty. What else do I need? Oh, there's the menu. Active, I don't need active. Prerequisites, progressions, and categories. Prerequisites, we can still take it from the trick form. Prerequisites, we don't have it. Let's go on the new trick. Let's grab this list. We are gonna go on the trick form. Let's go here and see what it is. Okay, so we only have the IDs essentially. So what I'm going to do is from the prerequisites, I'll just grab the name, I'll go in the trick form, and I'll put it here. From the trick here as well, progressions, I'm just gonna put it here as well, just like that. Okay. Another thing that somebody has actually mentioned in the comments is that this is actually failing now. So I think it's when we create tricks right now it's failing. So I've tested it, and the reason it's failing is because we don't actually set the default lists for these values. So let's actually go ahead and initialize these. So make these new lists, make them nice and pretty. There we go, right? So we're never gonna have a situation where one of these is null. So when we create something, these shouldn't be null, essentially. That error should go away. So this is okay if we don't set these, because these should be passed to us. So let's go ahead and take care of prerequisites. And I think we will need to select these out as well. I think the same way that we do here, yeah. So let's just to list this, we will just put this here, but instead of a new trick category, we will have prerequisites, or I think it was just new trick. That's what a prerequisite is anyway, isn't it? Or it's a trick relationship rather. That's what we want. So trick relationship. Appreciating this might be a little bit confusing. We don't actually put this on here as well, so we might want to put it there. So let's actually grab trick categories from there, because we're gonna need it. So we actually want to grab this from prerequisites, and on the prerequisite ID we will need to actually set the version as well, but for now I think we might get away with it, which is what I'm planning on. And the X itself should be that ID. The category there looks fine, and for the progressions, let's go ahead, grab the name here, and progression ID, set it to the slug there. So there we go. So we got the new trick. We want to add the new trick. The slug from the trick is there, it's not going to change. The version, we actually want to just grab the version on the trick. There can be a problem with this actually, because let's say somebody does one edit and then somebody does the next edit. What's going to happen? Are we gonna just pick? Are we just gonna create the same version? Then how do we distinct, basically? So if somebody does two edits, the version, the current active version, is not the last version, essentially. So let's go ahead and do this. In our database layer, we're going to add a class, and we're going to say query extensions. So these are going to be just helper queries. We're going to go make this static, and quickly, let's go into a where clause. So somewhere here, where. And for the where clause, let's just shift end to basically copy the line. We're going to go into query extensions, and we will just paste it here. We will get rid of the expression that we supply here. And we are just going to say this is an iQueryable. And what we want to do is for this iQueryable, we will need to specify that this iQueryable is working on a versioned model, so we can actually extract the version, right? So where tSource inherits from a version model, there it is. So now what we can do is basically say that we want the maximum version, okay? And what this is going to return is an integer instead. And that's pretty much it. We can actually pop it on one line and rename where to latest version. And going down here now, what we'll do is just basically set context latest. Actually, we'll need to grab it from tricks. So tricks latest version. And what we can do as well is int offset and provide an offset where we can just add the offset on the end, right? So we can either grab the latest version by the default or offset it by 1, right? I think that's okay. So we create the new trick. The actual version that we want to grab is from the new trick, and the thing that we return is also the new trick, okay? And potentially we want to redirect to the mod item instead of returning the trick. So I'm gonna put it to do here. For now, we'll just return it. I don't think we'll do anything, or we don't even have the functionality to do anything with this, but essentially just, I think I'll just redirect to the moderation page or something like that. Once we get that, what's going to happen is a trick is going to get created. So I think we can actually try to go through this process. So let's go ahead, give this a refresh. Let's go ahead and create a trick where we'll create test something, category kick. I think we'll need these. We'll not worry about prerequisites for now. And so that's created. So now what we should see, if we go to moderation, we have our test trick, right? Not a real trick, but here it is. And essentially what we want to do now is, once we get the magical 3 reviews, we should move this into a configuration or something like that. But once we get 3 reviews, on the 3rd review, that's when we want to say it's passed, and pop it on the front page. Let display it, right? It's a real trick now. Everybody's happy. So let's go ahead and go again, close everything, kind of clean slate. Moderation item controller. I'm appreciating this is going to be a long episode and probably maybe a little bit confusing. I don't know, but bear with it, and it should be fine. So we're gonna change things up a little bit, because we're no longer just gonna need to set the moderation ID on the review. We will need a form for the review. We will need a view model for the review, because what we're going to be getting is a mod item from our context. So moderation items, first or default. We are still going to have this clause here, like so. And what we're doing is we're including the reviews. So let's see, reviews, because what we're going to do is we're going to check if on the mod items reviews count is more or equals than 3. I know it cannot be more than 3 for whatever reason, because once the 3rd one hits, it should be equal to 3, and we should be just, you know, getting rid of the moderation item. But it's the programming world, and the moment that you don't put more or equals than 3, that's the moment that it's going to be more than 3 and never gonna hit 3 for some reason. You're never gonna find out, because it's not going to be reproducible. So don't mess with the computer gods, okay? Just put the more than or equals than 3, okay? And basically, during this situation, that's when we want to complete the trick. So, I mean, this is actually where some of the more interesting work is going to happen. So let's go ahead and see. So for the mod item, now that we're getting the mod item, this is where we want to say mod item. If it's going to be null, let's go ahead and return no content, because I mean, there is no content. Instead of using the review model that we have here, let's go ahead and create a view model. So we're going to go into the view model. We are going to create a class. So review view model. Let's go ahead, create this. Let's go into comment. We're just going to copy a bunch of stuff from here. I'll put it here. We'll make it a static class. We're going to use review instead of comment. Let's import everything. And all of this stuff won't exist anymore. So let's see what kind of stuff we want from the, from our review class. So we want the moderation item ID, copy the names as is, because I think that's what they're going to be on the UI as well. So we don't want to mess that up right now, because we already messed quite a few things up here. So let's go ahead and rename this to review and put this here. And then there's going to be the comment. So let's go back here, review, comment. Okay. So there we go. The rest is pretty much self-explanatory. Let's go back here. So when we return this here, so review view model, and it's just create, because we are not selecting from the database. We don't have the new review yet. So let's create a review form as well. So review, review form. There we go. So for the review form, I'm just gonna say that it should be something more or less like the review itself. So let's just grab the whole thing, put it here. I don't think we'll need the ID. We will need these two, the moderation item ID and the comment ID should really be maybe more than a property. Oh, actually, wait, hold up. The review status is quite important, and it actually should be on the model as well. So moderation item ID, I don't think that's important because we actually get the moderation item ID from the ID to where we post, so we don't need it there. But on the review model, we actually want the status as well. So review status, I mean, yeah, let's just bring it in here. What we want to do now is, once we got this, let's go ahead and create our review, right? So this is going to be a new review. We are going to get collision and names because we want to rename this to review form. And this is a review form as well. And then we're adding the review, and then we want to return this review. Cool. So for the review itself, this can actually go live in here. So this is where we set the ID. Status can be set from a review form. I'm not sure how I lost the import there, but have to, you know, bring it back in. Let's set the comment, right? Just general work. There is a potential situation here where what could happen is the mod item could have one review and then two reviews come in simultaneously. So this method will run in parallel essentially, and we will end up with 3 reviews in the end, but for each review going through this in the context of this, the review count is going to be 2 for both trails essentially. So it's a bit of an asynchrony parallel problem, but what I'm going to do is put a little to do, and I'll just say make this async safe. Okay, so we essentially, if 2 places try to submit reviews at the same time, we don't run into a problem where this condition here is missed for the asynchrony error that we are anticipating here. Okay, and another comment that I'm gonna put here, let's see, to do use configuration. Okay, so use configuration to essentially replace them. Let's say replace the magic 3. Okay, so at the moment on the UI we just have the magic 3, and here we have the magic 3. We want to, you know, replace this to be seeped from the configuration. So anyway, we got this. We got the reviews count because the actual thing that we're reviewing could be anything. What we want to do is create a separate service that will work on the versioned model rather than a specific model. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually we'll move this after the save changes async. For now, we will put it in the data layer. This will probably get moved, and what I'm gonna do is I'll name this version migration context. So you're not confused about the name. I'm just gonna explain the context part. So if you imagine 2 people are talking, they're having a conversation, and then you join in the middle of the conversation, you may not understand what the 2 people are talking about because you're missing the context essentially of the conversation from where it started and where it's going, right? So the context in this sense is that same context. The context means version migration. This is where version migration happens, and it shouldn't happen anywhere else. Okay, so let's get a constructor, and what we will need for this for now is only our appdb context. Let's name it context, and let's get our field in here. Just bring it on one line here, and we're just gonna have one function. It should be async void or async task actually, or maybe just async. I'm not sure. Let's just make it async task. If we need to change it, we will. And we'll do migrate. So what are we migrating? Well, let's bring up our moderation item. And on the moderation item, what we have is a target version, and the type. So we'll need these three things. What are we getting is the type, and target and version target is specifically what, like type is what category, and target and version target is what we're getting specifically from that category. Because if it's tricks, we have so many tricks, what kind of trick it is, and then what version of that trick are we actually migrating from to. Okay, so version migration context, let's go ahead and get our target ID, target version, string, target type. Okay, what we want to do now is create a helper function that will essentially do the resolution of the current and the next version. So what I will do is I'll have a public, and I'll return the tuple just to make it a little bit more interesting. We're gonna have a version model, so current, and then version model next. Okay, and we'll call it resolve current and next entities or models, entities, because it's actual entities. We're not just blueprinting them. And the thing that we want to pass to here is actually the same parameters, right? So I'm just gonna pass them along. We can put them on another line, just like that. So what is going to happen here? Here is where we can actually have our if statements and do a bunch of checking. So on the checking itself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check if the target type does it equal to moderation types trick. And again, this is the constant that we can use. I'm going to then get the current version from the context. So trick, let's say tricks, where I'm going to say, I think I'm missing a package for this, and yes. Again, X is active. So this is going to be the active version, currently active version. Then first or default, and then compare the slug in our case here to the target ID, right? So this is the current version. Then we want to get the next version, the version that we are migrating to. So this will not have the where of the active, and actually thinking about it, this doesn't need the where either. We can just put it in the and clause here. What's going to happen here is instead we're going to just compare the version to the target version, and this actually needs to be an integer because that's what we've specified. And this is essentially how we extract the current and the next version. What we can do now is just return current and next versions. And this will basically, the process of extraction can happen differently for difficulty or category. We're just going to basically say anytime we want to add another entity, we're going to add it to this list, because as soon as maybe if there's going to be a version model without a slug, we may need to parse the target ID into an integer, etc. So, but yeah, otherwise, if it's not a supported type, we're just going to throw argument exception and a name of target type, right? So if it's not supported, I mean, bad times. Right, let's go ahead and extract this. So what we're gonna do is resolve current, next, and blah 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 entities, target version and target type. Let's put all of this stuff here. What I can do then is deconstruct into variables to save me the time to type this. What's gonna happen at the end is I will need to basically save changes async, and I think I can just return this here. And this is the part where this just needs to be a task. It doesn't actually need a sync on there. What's going to happen is the migration in the moderation item controller, the migration process itself is not aware. Do we actually have a current? Are we actually migrating to a new version, or this new version is the first version? Okay. What we want to do is we just want to do a quick check. If current equals null, so if it's null, then actually, let's say if it's not null, then we're going to do a little bit of extra stuff like grabbing next version. We will be setting it to current version +1, and then we're going to take care of some stuff. Because let's say we create the first edit, the second edit, and the third edit. Third edit gets accepted first, and then the first edit gets accepted. How are we gonna like bounce the versions there? We'll need to shift versions around, is what I'm saying. Okay. For this reason, what we'll actually need to do is indicate temporariness. Okay. So let's go ahead and go into version model, and what we're going to do is put a flag on here, and we'll say temporary. So this is going to indicate that this version is like, it's not concrete. Nobody's going to see it until it's validated by a moderator. Okay. So when we do create a trick version from the beginning, this should just be set to true unless explicitly set to false. Okay. So let's go into here, and what we're going to do is on the next, we're going to activate it. And once it's actually activated, what we're going to do is set temporary to false. And here what we'll do is also to do role IDs of temporary versions. On the current one, if we actually do have it, we actually want to set it active to false as well. Otherwise, this process right here might actually not need to occur, because we'll always be rolling them, and this bit right here seems redundant because we already set the version. So I think it's okay to get rid of this, and as long as we solve this problem, it will work in the end. Now that we got the version migration context, let's go ahead register it with our pipeline. So we will add a scoped service, and this is going to be our version migration context. We can then go into the moderation item controller, go into here, and from services and migration context. And after we do have the counts, we're going to migrate. And in the migration context, let's actually make this private, because I mean, this shouldn't be used anywhere else except this specific migration context. Take the mod item target, mod item version target. Actually, that is named poorly. Let's go ahead and rename target version. I think that's more appropriate. And then mod item type. Oh, type is what we want to say, and we will need to await on this, because it does basically save changes async in the end. Looking at this, you know what actually could be better, because we probably want to close the moderation item in there as well, although the version migration context won't always depend on the moderation item. So I think it's okay to do this in this context, and we're not going to assume that this is doing any sort of saving. So let's actually get rid of this. We will do poor man's. I don't even know if you can call it poor man's. Let's just keep it like this, and we'll rely on the save changes async here. We don't need to wait on this, and the mod item, and let's just say deleted equals true, right? So it's closed, it's deleted, kind of the same thing. Mod items are really going to be viewed by moderators, and I think we can handle this specific case there. If this is ever going to become a problem on the moderation item itself, we can add a property that says resolved or closed or whatever else that can indicate the state of finishing basically a moderation item. There have been quite a few things that we've changed. Let's go ahead, close everything again. And one of the primary things that we actually do want to take care of is we go into the view models. For the trick view models, we're now returning a slug. This is a problem. Let's go ahead, copy this, and let's just close everything. And what we're gonna do is let's go ahead and search the web client. So we're gonna go into directories, web client, and what we're going to search for is .id. So .id, and wherever we use .id, we just want to identify that it's a trick difficulty or a category, and we want to change the IDs of those to slugs. Okay, and again, this is why in production you don't want to make such a big change for something so little. If you rename something like that, you need to make sure it's normalized in between your UI and your backend. Okay, but for now, while we're in the development, I say, why not? Right, reply doesn't matter, comment doesn't matter. Let's go through these. Okay, so this seems like everything's in node modules here. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Okay, so here we are on page.index. Let's take a look at what this is in s.collections. What are collections? These seem to be coming from, yep. So these will need to be changed to slugs. We will need to put these as lowercase. So let's make sure that we are only changing these IDs to slugs, right? So we got these. If you click on here in Writer, it will update them to be invalid. So you know what you've changed and what you didn't change. The review ID, we don't need to touch that. In the moderation item, mod ID. Okay, so this bit we're not going to change. In profile index, the key, this is for the submissions. We don't need to change that. Submission ID, again, for the video here, we don't need to change that. This is still on the profile. We don't need to change that. Next one is in the trick, _trick. So this is an individual trick. Where we have the trick ID, we will need to change this to slug. Next thing, trick ID here as well. We'll need to change this to slug. Difficulty ID, we will need to change this. ID factory, let's see, what do we have here? Related data, let's scroll down a little bit and let's take a look at what related data is. It's categories. These categories comes from tricks, so this is data on the initial load. So shouldn't have pressed that. Let's bring this back in and hopefully it's all in the same order. Looks like it. Let's get back here. Where were we? That looks changed. Okay, so there we go. Back at the ID factory. So this is actually highlighting this, so we don't need to change that specifically. We will need to change these here. So it looks like it's in pairs of threes for all of them. So categories, slug, category ID factory, slug, right? And route factory, slug. For prerequisites, same thing. Slug, slug, slug. For tricks as well, slug here, and slug here. Save that. Let's start going down on this one. So there's a couple of invalid ones. Next thing seems to be the OIDC client library. We don't care about that. This is the tricks store. Let's go ahead and replace the IDs here for trick. I mean, pretty self-explanatory. Yeah. And then the other bits are in getters. So we want to replace these with slugs as well. I mean, as long as you're understanding that we've renamed IDs to slugs, and if you're getting errors in the console in your browser, you know you still haven't renamed something, okay? So just track it down and rename it if you've missed anything or you're unable to follow. So there we go, right? So that's renamed. Everything should work now. Fingers crossed, toes crossed. Something else is crossed if you can cross it. Let's take a look at this. So, okay, one thing we just saw there is the tricks being displayed on the front page. So let's actually go ahead and take care of it. In the tricks controller, what we're going to do is, let's remove these controllers from here. We're not actually using them. And for all the tricks that we have, let's only get the ones that are active. Right? So we're just getting the active version. And the same thing is going to go for everything. So let's go ahead, place this here. List of submissions for trick. We can basically say where trick ID is active for now. That's on so we don't need to touch that. Everything else seems fine. Yeah, so we should only be getting tricks which are active on the front page. So that looks fine. That looks fine as well. Let's close it. Let's go ahead and give it a test. So I'm going to refresh this. Again, most of this stuff still doesn't require a login. which is fine because otherwise it's going to be a hell to test. Let's go ahead, go into trick. We'll create a test. I'm just going to put some bogus information here. Tick. Next and save. Let's refresh this so we know we are not getting this item on here on the front page. However, we will be getting it in the moderation item here, which we want to review. We are then going to review it, so let's approve, and on the third approve, that's when it should start appearing on the front page. So, and it should be closed here as well. So let's go back. Let's actually refresh this. I don't think we actually do anything with the moderation item being closed here. So that's something that we can actually handle that and do the check on the other bit. When we actually submit reviews, we can return something like, sorry, it's already closed, man, you know. Let's go back on the front page. Let's go ahead and refresh this because I pressed back and that's gonna cache data. But anyway, here's the test trick, test, and so this has went through the moderation process and is now version. The next step will be actually editing stuff. So hopefully we already set up most of the stuff for that, and it shouldn't be such a tremendous effort from this point on. But the last thing let's actually take care of is in the moderation item controller. So what we want to do is for all moderation items to list, what we're going to do is we're going to say the ones that are not deleted. Okay, because we're setting deleted here. And what we want to do is say if mod item deleted, we'll just return bad request and we'll say moderation item. No, I'm not sure why I'm typing it all in capital letters, but moderation item no longer exists. So we still have to do some work in terms of handling these errors and stuff like that and do proper pop-ups. But for now, this will be it. So hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. Leave a like and subscribe if you did. I stream on Wednesdays and Sundays, so join that if you're into that. I also have a Discord server where I do a bunch of announcements and answer questions and stuff. Come be part of the community if you're interested in that sort of thing. And I'll see you in my next episode.